Mary Denise Lands was a 39-year-old from Marshall, Michigan. She was in the medical field and had 2 children. On the evening of March 12, 2004, Mary came home from work. Her boyfriend Chris and his cousin were there. She and Chris eventually got into an argument. Mary stormed out of their apartment. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Humans are social animals. Sure, something like the well-known Myers-Briggs test may try to say that a certain sector of the population is introverted, but we know it's not quite that simple. For example, every test I've ever taken says I'm an introvert, but I go to the gym, I go to Starbucks, I'm on a trivia team, and I'm calling new people every week, and I love interacting with you, the listeners. Yet there's a reason scientists study not only the physical issues of humans being alone in space for long periods of time, but also the mental challenges. Our brains need interaction. They need communication. To thrive, they must have the sharing of ideas, feelings, and experiences. Without these aspects in our lives, our minds will degenerate. I mean, there's a reason the biggest penalty a prisoner can get, outside of execution, is to be thrown into solitary confinement. In fact, civil rights lawyers have argued against this form of punishment for the exact reason of what it does to a person's mind. In the case of Mary Lands, she had been in a relationship for 3 years, one that, at least from the outside, seemed to be a good one. But then her boyfriend insisted she move with him to another part of town, where Mary didn't know anyone. She then started to tell co-workers that Chris was becoming controlling. She wasn't being allowed to see friends and family, not even her own children. There were even rumors that Mary ended up in the emergency room with bruises. So when we are done analyzing this case, will we conclude she disappeared on March 12, 2004, or did the trouble actually start when Mary started living in isolation? And now, a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charlieproject.org. Mary Lands, at least from the public's point of view, was doing okay in her life. She worked at a hospital. She had 2 children. And Mary had a boyfriend, Chris Pratt, who, at least from the outside, seemed to be good for her. They went to parties and get-togethers, and friends claimed they never saw anything wrong with the couple. Yet in the months before Mary disappeared, unbeknownst to most people, Mary had gone to the hospital with bruises that looked to be from Chris hitting her. Then they also moved away from Mary's friends, and Mary intimated to her co-workers that Chris had become very controlling. So on March 12, 2004, Mary came home from work to find Chris there with his cousin Adam. It is alleged that after an hour or so, while Adam was still there and possibly after some drinking, Chris and Mary got into an argument, at which time Mary stormed out of the apartment complex, on foot, taking her leather jacket and mesh purse, but leaving behind her phone. Chris made no attempt to follow her to try to bring her back. When Mary didn't return almost 2 days later, Chris called her parents in California to see if they had heard from her. They hadn't. She was never seen again. Although this seems like a straightforward disappearance case, many questions remain. Number 1, why was much of the evidence collected in Mary's case lost by the Marshall Police Department? Number 2, why was a captain on the police force calling Chris 36 hours after Mary's disappearance when allegedly nobody even knew she was missing at that point? And number 3, how did items that Mary allegedly took with her that night eventually end up for sale? Not surprisingly, Chris Pratt is considered the main suspect in Mary's disappearance. But those people closest to Mary believe there is a group of people who know exactly what happened that night. The guest for this episode is Mary's cousin, Angela Sidey. Unfound News. For the last month, I've been talking about the new Patreon live show that happens every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. This video program is for Patreon people at the $12 a month level and above. Well, I have a new name for it. We're going to call it the Unfound Think Tank, because that's what it really is, a small group of people coming together to really get in deep regarding the case for that week. So, the Unfound Think Tank, meeting at 7 p.m. Eastern every Sunday evening. Please join if it sounds good to you. Next, the Unfound Books. Yep, the publishing of them has really slowed down. I'm not happy about that. The big problem right now is time. To put it simply, I have a lot more going on now than I did when the first couple came out. There was no YouTube live show, no newsletter, no Unfound Think Tank. In addition, over the past year, I've gotten more deeply involved in the cases Unfound is covering than I did in the first year. In fact, I've actually entertained the idea of taking a month off from the episodes to get caught up on the books. We'll just have to see. Finally, one of Unfound's former guests has a book out. Jeff Wise published The Taking of Flight 370. He was on Unfound way back in July 2017. If you are interested in what may have happened to the Malaysian airliner from 5 years ago, please check his book out on Amazon. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week I need to thank Keone, Megan, Sherry, Robert, Amy, Carol, and Julie. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at myshopify.com, cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the cousin of Mary Lands, Angela Sidey. Angela, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We don't have too many cousins as guests on Unfound, so I feel like I need to ask you, what caused you to get involved in making sure that Mary's case is not forgotten? And first, I need to ask, how are you and Mary related?
She's my cousin. My mom, or my grandma and her mom are sisters. And they were very close, and the whole family was very close. Just
Okay.
yeah, like even like her mom, they would move back and forth. It was like back and forth from Michigan to California, just so the sisters could be together, basically. Like just so they're pretty close.
Okay. And so the Lands family is originally from California or Michigan?
California.
California, okay. And we have to remember that, of course, this disappearance took place in Michigan. Okay, so you are her cousin, your grandmother, her mother were sisters, and she, of course, disappeared in 2004. How long have you been involved in this, and what motivated you? Of course, she has many cousins. What caused you personally to get involved?
That was about, I think it was 2013. I had run into my cousin Katie, which is her niece, and I had asked her. She had just actually moved back. She had just moved back from Michigan to California, because they did that often, back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I had asked her what was going on, any news about Mary, because it'd been like some years since I had what happened. And she told me that her grandparents felt kind of defeated, and they had an investigator working, but a lot of things that were promised, I guess, just not much progress was made, and they were just upset and disappointed, and so I was like, okay, well, since I'm, let me do something, let me say, because I felt like a personal responsibility, because it's family, and because I want to, someone in my family, someone did something bad to them, I want to, have justice.
Sure.
That's just who I am in general. Like, so I was like, okay, since I'm computer savvy, and well, I'm going to start a Facebook page. And so I just got like, 'cause she was telling me all this stuff about like whatever was going on. And I felt bad, because I felt bad for my aunt, like to know they were going, like, just that's something that I know it doesn't happen to everybody's family, but that's like a big deal. Like, and to know
Hmm.
like this was happening, I wanted to help. That's all. So I got started on a Facebook page and just went from there because I'm kind of like a computer person, I guess you could say, not
Okay.
very, experienced, but I'm pretty good on the computer. So I figured
Okay.
I could use that to to help the family.
Sure. How did the rest of your other cousins feel about you doing this?
Oh, they were happy. I mean, like, because I'm really close with Katie, the one who lives here mostly back and forth, and
Mm-hmm.
she's the one that gave me a lot of the info and could tell me what was going on down there. And yeah, and my aunt, I told my aunt about it, and she was happy. Any help that they could get, because they're none of them are really like, I guess, computer savvy or, so, and I just, yeah,
Okay.
any help they would appreciate because
Okay.
after, yeah, all the years, nothing had happened. So
Right. And we have to be clear when she says here, you actually live in California. You don't live in Michigan or even Marshall, Michigan. You live in California.
yes,
Okay. All right. Just so everybody understands that. Okay.
yes,
So that's what caused you to get involved. It's felt like it was something that you needed to do because it is family. Maybe you got the idea that maybe Mary's case was kind of being forgotten. And so you decided to kind of get involved so it wouldn't be forgotten. And now you've been working on it for over 5 years.
yes.
All right. Very good. Let's talk about Mary. What do you? You've told me that you two were kind of close in age, even though your grandmother and her mother were sisters, but you two were kind of close in age. What do you remember about her? How often did you two get together? Anything like that? What do you remember?
God, I was honestly really young, but I know that she was sweet and kind, and I don't know, but she was very quiet. I will say that much. But I also was very, very young. But the stories that I do have about her from my mom, because my mom was very, very close with her growing up. They were actually a pair, you know, while they lived here back and forth. But just that she was sweet and kind. She was a good mom. She loved her kids. Very close with her mom. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just she was the quiet out of I'm gonna say most of the women in our family are kind of, I'm not gonna say loud, but we have our opinions, and she was more quiet and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, more of a quiet one,
A little
I
more
should say.
laid back, I guess.
A lot more laid back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you know her well enough to know some things maybe about her interests and her hobbies, things like that?
Yes, well, she loved to get dressed up and go out, like uh, just to have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. She traveled a lot. She liked to go to different places. Mexico. I know she's been to a few places I've never been, but yeah, she liked to have a good time. She liked to dress up, put on makeup. She was very pretty.
I've seen pictures of her. You're right. You're right. And we have to remember that she was 39 when she
Yes.
disappeared. For work, I know she was in the medical field. Was she a nurse or
She
what
did.
was she?
She did medical billing for a doctor's office.
Oh, okay. Okay. And she had done that for a while.
Yeah,
That
for
was
some years. Yeah.
okay. And she though had two children, who I'm guessing are still around, 15 years later. Is that from? We have to remember that Lands is actually her married name. Her maiden name was Marshall. Coincidentally, the
Yes.
same
I
name
know.
as the place where she disappeared. That's kind of odd.
Yeah, I
But
know.
maybe you can tell the listeners a little bit what you remember about her marriage, and about her children.
Well, both her children were adults. Well, at least I know her oldest, her son Josh, he was already adult. I think Stacy was, I want to say like 15.
Mm-hmm.
As far as her marriage, she lived with her husband Gary in Atlanta. That's where they lived during the marriage.
Wow.
Um, who's Stacy's dad. However, Josh's dad still lives in Marshall. Brad, he's in
Okay.
Marshall. But her second marriage was, yeah, she lives
Okay.
in Atlanta with Gary.
Okay. So she had been married a couple times and has two children, one child to each guy.
Yeah, the with Brad though they weren't married. That was like her
Oh, okay.
her high school sweetheart.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine too. And so her children, you said one was 15 at the time she disappeared, and her son was older, was maybe 20.
Hmm. Yes, and he was actually expecting, him and his wife were expecting their first child, and Mary was super excited to be a grandma. That was what she
Oh
was looking
no.
forward to.
And she disappeared before.
The baby was born, yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't know that. The listeners should know I didn't find that out till right now. Okay. Wow. Well, it's been 15 years, so her son would be like 35 or something like that now, and her daughter would be like 30.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And do you communicate with them once in a while? Do you let them know what's going on if you're doing something for their mother, like an event or anything like that? Do they keep in touch?
Well, I haven't talked to Josh in forever, but and Stacy, she's in. She never. She did come back. There was some issues where she had actually moved with her dad during this time while Mary was with Chris, and actually they weren't talking when she went missing. But she did come back
Mm-hmm.
when it happened, and I don't know some stuff. I don't know. It was from what I hear, the way she was treated when she was down there. I don't know. She didn't. She just left and said she was never going to come back. I mean, that's all I can say about that. She's
Okay.
kind of kept hush from the family, and she doesn't want no part of it. I don't know.
Okay. That's too bad. Do you think that, we're going to get into this, but being that Mary and Chris, and we're going to talk about Chris here in a second, do you think that that was something, that relationship maybe caused Mary to not see her kids as much as she would have liked, or?
I will say that the reason why her daughter moved out had to do with that relationship.
Right.
I will say that.
Okay.
Uh,
I think I remember us talking about that before too, and that's why I asked you. Okay. Well, let's talk now about some of the people in her life. Let's talk about her parents, who at the time, I guess, lived in California in 2004. I'm guessing they still live there now. Um,
Actually, they had like literally 5 days. They had just left from Marshall and moved
hmm,
back to California in only 5 days before she went missing. So, five
wow.
days before she went missing, her mom, her dad, and her brother and family had moved to California, and then they got that phone call, and they'd only been there because they drove down here, and it takes 2.5 days. So they were
Right.
only down in California for like 2 days, I think, before they got the phone call, and they came right back, and they haven't left there ever since because
Okay. So
they
they were
weren't
in
too desperate.
California, and when this happened, they moved back to Michigan.
Yeah, they had just moved to California,
Yeah.
literally like a few days prior, and yeah, to like they usually did over the years, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they were only there for like 3 days before they got that phone call.
And then they moved back to Michigan, and you say they've been there ever since.
Ne- yeah, never. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. And I'm guessing though that they aren't youngsters anymore, being that she was 39. It's been 50 years. She'd be 54. Her parents must be up in age now.
yes. I just talked to my aunt Nita, her mom, like last week, and she said uh, her dad, Clifford, he's got dementia. I mean, they're in like like in, I'm not gonna say the right word for old home, but like in like an elderly home where
Assisted
they could
living.
live.
Assisted
Assisted
living.
living, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my aunt, she seems, we had a good conversation, but I know that Clifford, it's his dementia's getting worse. He's kind of, yeah. And I
Okay.
know he was really, really, and that's another thing. Like as far as they're not getting any younger, and their days are numbered, and it's like I would at least I want them to hopefully see something happen before their health is not getting any better either. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
And now, this next person is going to be mentioned when we get to the days around what happened. Sue Burkwald. Who is she?
She's been Mary's best friend since like kindergarten, since grade school.
Okay. Of course, we've already mentioned him. His name is Chris, but his full name is Chris Pratt. Yes, exactly like the now famous actor. Of course, Chris Pratt back in 2004. I don't think anybody knew who he was back then, but maybe. But Chris Pratt was Mary's boyfriend at the time. However, in some places I have seen him called fiance. Is that true or not?
Yes, yes, that's true. She had a ring and everything.
Hmm.
So yeah, they were engaged.
Okay. And how long do you think that they were engaged before she disappeared? Any ideas?
About a year. About a year. I know they were together a total of maybe 3 years, maybe almost four actually, but
Wow.
for about a year, the last year she was
Okay.
around.
In those 3 years, and once again, I understand. Maybe you were in California at the time. Did you ever have a chance to meet him at all?
No, no, I
Okay.
did not.
What did you hear about him? If you ever talked to Mary, what did she have to say about him during those few years?
That he's a perfect gentleman, that he was a good guy. I mean, the whole
Hmm.
family thought he was a good guy, except
Yeah.
my her dad. He kind of always, Clifford. He never. He said he could never quite get him. I don't know. He always had
Mhm.
an odd feeling about him, but
Okay.
that's fathers maybe.
Right. Well,
You're
it's
right.
interesting, being that you bring that up, it's interesting that um I would just the way I look at it is that being that her parents moved from Michigan to California, leaving her there with him, you could almost see that as saying, well, they must have felt that the relationship was pretty good. I think that if they would have felt that Mary was really in some trouble or something, I'm guessing they would have stayed. Maybe.
Absolutely. Or
Right.
had her go with them or something.
Sure. So I think that's very interesting. So when you say that she told you he was a perfect gentleman and everything, that maybe more explains why her parents, did move to California. Of course, we know that they ended up coming right back.
Yeah.
But and they were together at least over 3 years. Relationship seemed to be good, but of course, we know that she ended up disappearing not long after her parents moved to California.
Yeah.
Um, let me ask you this though, and I just have to ask this because this is my job.
Okay.
To your knowledge, did Mary have any personal issues, any drug issues, alcohol issues, mental issues that you ever heard about or knew about?
No, I will say no.
No.
I can honestly say that.
Okay. Not into uh just just to name some drugs that often come up on this program: heroin, opioid addiction, crystal meth, bipolar disorder, anything like that, schizophrenia, anything.
I will say out of many family members, she is one of the sober and sane ones, if that makes sense.
Okay, very good. I once again, just questions I have to ask because those issues do come up quite a bit on Unfound.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's fine.
let's move on to this. What have you learned? Once again, I realize that you weren't there, but what have you learned about Mary's life in those maybe the days, weeks, and months before she disappeared. I have been told, and I know we talked about it, but I've had some other conversations with some other people that I will talk about later, that
Okay.
she and Chris had moved at some point not long before she disappeared. Is that true? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I know that I believe she was living at a house that he had, but because it was like out in the middle of nowhere, um she didn't want to live out there, so she ended up getting like a townhome that was more into town, so because she was too far away from everything. So that's they did move to
Mm-hmm.
those apartments.
That's interesting because I had been told by somebody else whose name I will not mention that their interpretation was exactly the opposite. Was that she was like living in familiar surroundings and then Chris like took her away. But
I know that as far as taking her away, I know that as far as everybody around her,
yeah.
that she basically family, friends, less communication,
Mm-hmm.
didn't hear from her ever, kind of isolated her. But I do know at one point she was living out to where it was, I mean, that's what I was told.
Now, once again, I have to preface this that this was not something that seems was well known at the time, but was Chris being abusive? Once again, you've explained to him. Everybody thought he was this great guy, but
Hmm.
at some point, maybe after she disappeared, did some people find out that she had been going to the hospital with bruises and things like that?
Yeah, it wasn't until like there were records requested by her parents as far as medical records, and that's when they found out about they had no idea. Nobody had no idea she was a victim of domestic violence. And that's, when her medical records were requested and her parents, had received them. I guess there were broken toes. I don't know even know
Oh
how
my
you would do
gosh.
that, but broken fingers, wrists, arms. Yeah, and that was not found out until afterwards, which, yeah, they had no idea. Nobody had no idea.
Man, the two of them, I mean, Chris, of course, must have been putting on quite a show then
Yeah,
for
me and my cousin
people to
were just
think.
talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Just Yeah, he was Mr. Nice guy, Mr. Funny guy, perfect gentleman, which is
Mm-hmm.
really scary to considering to know what was really going on.
Okay. I'm not sure if you've seen any of the medical records and everything, but usually in cases like that, they take pictures. Have you ever seen any pictures of some of these injuries that she had?
No, I did not.
Okay. Now, I also understand possibly, is it true that maybe one of your cousins, I know you are a cousin, but one of Mary's other cousins was working at this hospital and might have seen this firsthand while it was going on?
Yes, from what I'm told on her dad's side, I guess a family member worked at the hospital, but from what I'm told, Mary begged her not to say anything to her parents, and I guess she said
This
okay.
this cousin, we're not going to name the person.
Yeah,
Um, Does that
but she
surprise you
knew.
knowing Mary the way you do? And of course, a lot of abused women try to keep it secret. Does it maybe surprise you that Mary tried to do that as well?
No, because for me personally, being in a abusive relationship, it's like shame, it's embarrassment. You don't want people to know what a fool you are, or you're not. It's I totally understand. I totally understand.
Okay. So this is what she was going through, even though, and this was going on right up to the point that her parents left her in Michigan and moved to California.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Um, in anything that you've heard since her disappearance, any chance that Mary had ever said to anybody that because of this abuse, that she had plans to maybe leave him? Did he maybe did she stick around? Is it possible that he could have maybe threatened her children? Anything like that?
Well, I'm told he threatened her if she ever said anything about anything or what he's done, he'll kill her, harm
Mhm.
her. I mean, I've heard it, yeah, all the kinds of
Yeah.
horrible things.
Okay. But you never heard anything about any plans of Mary ever saying to maybe a coworker or something that she planned to
No,
leave Chris? No.
no. Mary
Okay.
never said anything to anybody.
Okay. And to your knowledge, didn't Mary possibly have another boyfriend or anybody like that? That
No, absolutely not.
no? Okay.
Mm-mm.
All right. Let's move up to March 12th, 2004. It was a Friday.
Mhm.
And what do we know about that day? In your 5 years, 5+ years of working on this case, you being the cousin, what have you learned about that day? About let's just take it from Mary going to work and go from there.
Yeah, so Mary went to work, and I know at some point she went home. The last that any like she's seen actually on can't actually she's seen on camera. I want to say in the evening, but like maybe 6, 7 ish,
Okay.
buying a couple soda pops at the at a local store, and I think gum, soda pop and gum, and that's the last like known place for her to be in, as far as seeing her on camera. But she did work that day. It was Friday,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just a regular work day. But as far as anybody knowing exactly, because her family had already, everybody was gone already.
Right.
So, but yes, they seen her. She was on video at the store buying a couple soda pops and some gum, and that was about 6, 7 ish that
Okay.
evening.
And what have we learned since then? Did she go directly home after that?
Yes, yes, that we know of. Yes, and then from what the Christopher Pratt says, around 10 or
Right.
10:30.
And let me just maybe
Yeah.
jump in here
Oh,
for a
okay.
second. Everything
Sorry.
we're going to hear here is
Okay.
Chris' version of
Yes.
what happened. This isn't like there's no videotape of this. There
No.
wasn't some third party who came forward to tell this story. This is
Hmm.
Chris's story as to what happened when Mary got home that night. So I'm sorry to jump in. Please continue.
It's so fine. So he said they were arguing around 10:30 that night,
Mm-hmm.
and she told him that she was going to go for a walk, and so he said she took off and walked. He's seen her walk under the carport and then walk away, and that was that. He said yeah, she didn't take her cell phone or keys. She had just got a new vehicle, a Durango, that she was super proud of because it was her first vehicle that she ever purchased herself. She had only her still from work. She had her hospital scrubs on, and her favorite brown like bomber jacket, like puffy jacket,
Yeah.
and her little. It was a little mesh purse that she kept, like her just. She had like her IDs, credit cards, and important things like wrapped up, like I guess like a rubber band, like wallet
Mm-hmm.
things. And it was a little mesh purse, and that was that. He said she took off because she was mad, and that's the last he's seen her.
Okay. I do need to ask, because this is something that I just learned recently. Is it true that possibly somebody else was also in their place when she got home? Chris's cousin Adam was he
Oh,
there as well?
his nephew.
Nephew,
That's his nephew.
okay,
Yes,
nephew Adam. Okay, and he was there too.
yes, that's what. Yes, that's what I'm told. Yes,
That's what Chris says. And once again, what Chris
or
says.
yes,
We
that's what
don't
Chris said.
know what
Sorry,
the truth is, but Chris says. Okay.
you're
Chris
right. Yep.
said that his nephew Adam was there. And how old would have Adam been? Do you know? Probably not very old.
Probably my age. Yeah, I would say at that time, early 20s, maybe late teens, early 20s. I'd say
Okay.
early 20s.
Okay. I'm guessing that Chris maybe was around Mary's age, like late
Yes,
30s, early 40s at the time.
yes.
Okay. So Adam is there, the nephew. Does Chris ever say why he and Mary got into this fight, this argument? Did he ever say what it was about?
I don't I'm not too sure of. I just know that they
Mm,
were arguing.
all right. Okay. He says they were arguing, but he's never given an explanation as to
Mm,
why.
no.
Could have been something important. Could have been something stupid. We don't know. All right.
Yes.
And so she leaves, and to your knowledge, does he ever go out following her? Um, Try to track her down when she doesn't come home back after maybe 10 minutes, anything like that? Did he ever in his story ever say anything like that?
No, he did not.
All right, so he kind of just says she went out and he was just waiting for her to come back.
Yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, in anything that you found out in the last 5 plus years, has did Mary ever do that before, where she and Chris got into a fight and then she took off, whether getting in her vehicle or walking off, going to a motel for the night? Any stories that you've ever heard, anything like that?
No.
None.
None.
Okay. All right. And I'm guessing you would know, or maybe your parents, maybe being that they thought the relationship was good, might not know anything about that. So, not sure if that would leak out or not. Okay, so
Yeah.
she takes off, but she doesn't take her phone and she doesn't drive off in her car. She
No.
allegedly walks off.
Yes.
Okay. Did Chris, and once again his story, did he have any idea where he thought she might be going?
No, I don't think, honestly, I think about it. No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think he said where he thought she would go. That I'm not too sure.
Okay.
That was
Once
never
again,
like
we realize this is
said.
just his story. We realize that he's probably a pretty good suspect, but I just want to
Yes.
know what is the story that he told.
Yeah.
That's all we're trying to say.
Okay. Pretty basic. Just
Okay.
yeah.
He kept it very simple, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. When in your family, when do you start realizing that something's not right with Mary? Maybe she's not calling people. She's not texting people, if texting was a thing in 2004. When do people in your family start realizing that maybe something's not right?
Okay, so Sunday, so she, I guess, went missing, allegedly went missing Friday.
Okay.
So Sunday, I think it was in the afternoon, my aunt, her mom gets a call from Chris, or it was somebody on the in the family answered the phone, and
Mm-hmm.
he asked her or whoever that had answered the phone, "Have you seen Mary?" And they were like, "What?" Like, and he was like, "Yeah, I haven't seen her since," or he said, "I haven't seen her since Friday." And my aunt told me, she said, as soon as he said that, she said, I'm not going to say the exact words, but that did something to her. Is I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna say, not going to fill in the blanks, and that was that. And so her brother's Mike wife, sorry, Betsy, called her brother back in Michigan and told him to call the cops and report her missing right away. And then that was on Sunday, and that's when they packed up their stuff and that's when they headed back from here to back to Michigan. Like it was no, as soon as he called and said, "Have you seen Mary?" Like
Mm-hmm.
seriously, I mean, my aunt said she already knew that she was gone, or that
Something was wrong.
she already knew.
All right. So even if Chris, people, I know the listeners are going to be very suspicious of him for a very good reason, but he did call. I mean, and I could say,
Mhm.
well, she's a grown woman. She's blowing off some steam. Maybe she's staying at a friend's house because they had a fight. But then he did end up kind of show some sort of concern. I guess maybe it's fake. We don't know. But he did call her parents to say, hey, have you heard from Mary?
Yeah, but from what I know, he said is like he was saying, "Is Mary
Uh
with
huh.
you?" As if did she leave with you guys? Like he
Mm
knew, like she didn't leave
hmm.
to
Mm hmm.
California with them. Like I don't know.
Mm
It's
hmm.
just that. Yeah,
Could you have thought that she jumped on a jet on that Saturday and flew to California?
possibly.
Okay. Okay. So he
Okay.
calls. He
Yeah.
calls, and but he did not file a missing persons report at that point. Who did file the missing persons report?
It was her family. You know um her sister-in-law called her brother-in-law, basically, that was still in Michigan, is the one that called their local, police and reported missing.
Okay. And what did you find out that the police do? Did they go out and talk to Chris? Did they like canvass the area? Did any dogs or anything get involved maybe in that next week? I mean, if she disappears on a Friday, Chris calls parents on Sunday. Maybe the police show up on Monday or Tuesday. What was done?
So I know that by Tuesday they had search parties formed, missing like posters hanging, to hang. Everybody started looking. I know dogs were brought out. So, and
Mm-hmm.
also I believe, so that started Tuesday. I even know that like the FBI and they had formed some sort of task force
Huh.
like in the very first few weeks. Yeah, so I mean, everybody was out looking for her. I mean, the news was out there. They would go to the fountain and like for the very first days that she was gone, like I think every day, like at least for a few weeks, there was every night everybody gathered, as cold as it was, and had candles going, praying and stuff. So
Right. Right.
everybody,
Do you remember
yeah.
this time? Where were you? What were you doing when you found out that Mary was missing?
I was down, honestly, I was down in California, so I just know from what I've heard and what I've
Mm-hmm.
seen.
And so how did you find out? Did her mother tell you or call you, or how did you find out? Do you remember?
As far as far as like how I found out like what they were doing and
Or
everything,
no, how did you find out that Mary was missing?
from her mom calling my grandma and it just going through everybody in the family.
Family going down through the
Did you
family.
hear what happened? Yeah, did you hear what happened? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Mary,
Right. Right. You were out there with, of course, some of your family members when you were talking to him at that time, those first few days. Did anybody offer up any theories, suggestions, possibilities?
honestly, I don't even think we thought, that it was something serious, or not even that she even does this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just something, I don't know. It was, no, I mean, I know that her sister was down here, and I know, but this was way after, like, because we're all living our lives, and you know, you know, life goes on, and I just know that at one point we had heard about it, and then maybe shrugged it off, didn't think anything like serious, but then I know that my grandma and her mom had a good discussion about it, and my grandma never really said too much about it, but
Mm-hmm.
I know now, like how serious it was,
Right.
But
Weren't sure what to
yeah,
think, being that you're so far away. You're like
yeah,
2,000 miles away in California. You don't know. Maybe you hadn't even seen Mary in a while. Maybe you hadn't talked to her in a while.
yeah,
You didn't
been
know
years.
Chris from anybody. He could have walked down the street. You probably wouldn't have known him.
Yeah,
So you're really not sure what to think living so
had
far
no
away.
idea. Yeah, had
Right.
no idea, like what,
Okay.
yeah, the seriousness of it all,
Right.
and
Did the police, of course, we know Chris's story, but did the
mhm.
police, once again, in those, maybe that first week, 10 days, did they go inside the place where Mary was living with Chris to kind of look around? Did they maybe give Chris a good talking to and some good questioning? What have you learned about that?
Okay, well, I know, like, even though there were search parties, in those first days or whatever,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they never considered, she was considered like, adult runaway. Like, she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
considered like missing at risk or anything for at least the first 6 months to almost a year.
Wow.
So I
Wow.
know there were, every in the community was looking for her, but as far as law enforcement goes, she was just, they always said, "Oh, she'll be back," kind of thing. That was how it was treated, honestly.
Okay, so because of that, the police were not motivated to maybe do some forensics inside the apartment, nothing like that.
No, not at
Not,
least for
not an,
6 months, at least.
okay. Do you know if the police ever talked to Adam, Chris's nephew, who was allegedly there that night as well? Ever got a
That
statement from him.
I'm not too sure of, but I do know that that Chris was given a lie detector test, but they said they could not disclose the results because it's an ongoing investigation, and that's about
Okay.
all I was
Okay.
told.
And you still do not know the results of that 15 years later?
No,
Okay. All
nobody
right. So
does.
they talked to Chris. They're looking around. I've read though at one point they did use some dogs, and what did the dogs do?
I know that they searched. Oh, there was so many different. I mean, in the very beginning, the dogs. I guess they sniffed out as many areas as they could. I'm not too sure, but and I know years after there were, searches still continuing to go on.
Mm-hmm. But I had read that the dogs, some one set of dogs, and I'm not sure how soon this was after she disappeared, led the police to a local motel. Is that
Oh
true?
yeah, that was in like the very first days.
Right.
But from what I don't think anybody understood why that would be because she had no reason to be at a motel and she never went to the motel. So, from some family members say it's BS. Um,
Hmm.
but I can't say for sure. I wasn't there firsthand, but no one really understood how that even went together. But, you know, that's,
Okay.
I don't, yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Did anybody in this, and was this like a house or was this like an apartment complex where Mary and Chris were living at the time? How would you describe it?
Like apartment complex.
Okay. Did anybody hear or see anything unusual that night? Did anybody ever come forward to say, you know what, I did see a woman walking down the street that night? Anything like that, to your knowledge?
No, no one was even questioned, which I did have somebody that had lived next to Mary like years, like sent a message on the page and say, "Oh, I didn't even know," like, and I had lived right next to her, and no one ever came and questioned me. Although the person didn't say they had information, they were just like, "Oh, why didn't they come ask me?"
Hmm.
So, but no, no one was questioned or asked because, like I said, they considered that she just took off and
Hmm.
she just left and she'll be
Okay.
back.
Okay. But still, nobody said they saw her that night. Nobody heard or
Nope,
saw anything unusual that night.
nope, nobody.
Okay. All right. So they're claiming it's just an adult walking off, which there's really, for the most part, nothing illegal about that. I don't think it becomes illegal, and maybe till somebody doesn't file their taxes or something like that. Adults are
Right.
allowed to walk off. We have these dogs that went to a motel, maybe, possibly. Um, Mary got frustrated with Chris, decided she was going to spend the night at a motel. Maybe that's possible, but overall, all we have is Chris's word about what went
Yes,
on, we're to
that's it.
and if we're to believe that Adam was there as well. Okay, so let's go over some more things. What I like to call the rest of the case, being that we've gone over the generalities of what Chris says happened and what the police did, and of course her family showed up and were assisting, trying to do
Hmm.
all that they could. But of course, 15 years later, the case is still unsolved. First, I want to talk about is her phone. It was left behind.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whatever happened to that phone? Did anybody get to look at it? You know, open it up. Of course, maybe it might be a flip phone way back in 2004.
Yeah.
See if she had
Yeah.
called anybody, like before she disappeared. Had anybody tried to call her? Any ideas about that?
Okay, so I know that her phone was I'm not too sure where the phone was found, but I do know that as far as like the incoming outgoing calls,
Mhm.
they do have because her sister-in-law had requested them and she actually has them, so they could see themselves like who had called because she said she had talked to Mary that night actually.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say because she had everybody had drove down there except her sister-in-law and the kids. They had flown over there, which was that Sunday. So when she arrived in California, she called her and she said she sounded fine, everything. And then when she had called her later that evening is when she didn't answer. But as far as the people, I know that when they did the search, I believe it was when they found her phone and they went through it, I believe. I don't know the
Mm-hmm.
exact specifics of it. You might know
Okay.
more than me, but Yes, the her phone was found at the apartment.
Okay. When the records were looked at regarding Mary's phone, anything that stood out to anybody, anything that caused anybody who knew her well, like her family, to say, "Well, that's an unusual phone call."
No, I know that she didn't use her phone like there was no outgoing calls
Mm-hmm.
after like 10 o'clock, 10-ish that evening.
Okay. Maybe I should ask you this: did Chris try to call Mary's phone? Did he realize that it was there when she left? Any
I think
ideas?
he already knew that it was there, I
Okay.
believe. Like,
Okay.
'cause he didn't try to call her phone or anything.
All right, because he knew it was right there at the house. Okay.
Yes, in plain
Okay.
sight, I believe.
All right. So phone can't be tracked. It can't be pinged. No way to get a hold of her that way. It does seem unusual she would leave without it, but she also left without her car. But her purse and this jacket were missing, at least at the time. Now, this is something that I'm still not sure is fully explained 15 years later. It sure is curious. Who is Tim Bryant?
He's a well, at the time was a sergeant with the Marshall Police Department.
Okay. And did he know Chris?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Does Chris have a criminal record even before Mary disappeared?
I believe so. I believe so.
Okay. And have you learned in the last 15 years that Chris was a bit of a drug dealer?
Among that, yeah, more things too, but yes, for
Right.
sure.
And yeah, he's accumulated quite a record since Mary's disappearance. Is it true that Tim Bryant called Chris about 36 hours after Mary disappeared?
Yes, it is true.
All right. How was that discovered?
On the phone records, like all the papers of the, incoming, outgoing calls, and when the number was called back, because the number wasn't familiar to anybody, um, the person that answered said, "This is Tim Bryant," and that's how they knew. I mean, that's how it was found out. Like,
Okay, so we have a
yeah,
police officer calling Chris, who is a drug dealer, 36 hours after Mary disappeared.
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
and so 36 hours. When was this actual call?
I believe it was like, I want to say like 2 in the morning. And I know that it lasted about 11 minutes, which is a really long time.
That's
It
a
was
long,
a lot.
yeah, 11
Yeah,
minutes is not a short phone call.
no.
This would have been 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. on Sunday morning.
Yes, Sunday morning. Yep.
Tim Bryant was eventually asked about this phone call. What did he say?
He said that it wasn't him that had called Chris. He had let Sue, which is Mary's best friend,
Mm-hmm.
use his phone, and she used it to call Chris to see about Mary.
Huh. And this is the Sue Burkwalt that we mentioned earlier, who is the friend that had known Mary since they were kids.
Yes, yes, it is.
To your knowledge, did Tim Bryant ever know Sue? To your knowledge.
I know that they knew each other, as far as passing and
Mm,
around town because it's a small town.
okay. But where did he say that he encountered Sue that this could have even happened?
At the bar, at the one of the, I think it's called the Stagecoach. Officers do their patrols to see if anybody's gonna drink and drive, and
Mm-hmm.
I think he had went in there and did his rounds, and he said she was in there and that she asked to use his phone.
Okay, so she wants to call her friend Mary at 1 in the morning on a Sunday morning. Instead of using her own phone, she wanted to use a police officer's phone.
Yeah, I know. It's just
We're just
funny.
and that's the facts. That's what they've
Yeah,
said. So we're just going through
exactly.
this. It sounds very unusual.
I
Now
know.
it gets even more unusual because what does Sue say about this phone call?
She denied it. She said that wasn't her because she was at home and she had two 10-year-old kids at home, her daughter and a friend, and she wouldn't have left them to even, or she doesn't even go to bars. So that's what she said. She said it wasn't her.
Okay. And is there any chance, because I have to ask, is there any chance that Sue and Tim, have you ever heard this in the last 15 years, yes or no? That maybe Sue and Tim were maybe involved in some sort of relationship, and that's why she might have been with him and used his phone.
No, I've never heard that.
Never. Okay.
Never.
So she's denying. I think this bar was called the Stagecoach. Um,
Yes.
she denies ever even being there.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And in your time that you've been involved in this case, 5+ years, have you ever had anybody come forward to you saying, you know what, I saw Tim that night in the Stagecoach? I realize it's been years ago, but does anybody ever remember seeing her there the night Mary disappeared, or seeing him there, or any around that time, 36
No,
hours
I'm
later?
never, and I've gotten a lot of information come from the page, and that was never ever,
Never.
no, that never ever was said to me or came to me or anything even about the bar at all or him even being there or her either.
Okay. Is there any proof that Sergeant Tim Bryan, who eventually became a captain, believe it or not, after this, um, is there any record of him ever making any other calls to Chris?
No, I do not know that. Yeah, that I don't know. That's
Okay.
the only one that I know of.
Okay. Very good. Now, what have you found out about Tim Bryant's reputation as a police officer?
Oh man, I don't even know where to start as far as all the things I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
That, people were scared of him. I mean, I've heard that he was dealing drugs, out of high schools and his son was helping. I mean, I've heard all kinds of crazy
Mm-hmm.
stories that, yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I should say it, but I've heard stories of why he was no longer a police officer and his options. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that came away that I don't even know what to make of, to be honest with you.
Okay, so he has a general reputation of not being a great cop, and in fact, I don't believe he's a cop anymore in
No.
Marshall, Michigan, or anywhere else.
Yeah, he isn't.
Okay, so he's calling Chris. Do you believe at that time, have you ever had any information detailing if Tim at that point even knew that Mary was missing?
Yeah, no, not that I know of.
Not that I know. Okay. Okay. Did you mentioned Tim's son, who might have been involved in some drug dealing? Were
Yes.
Tim's son and Chris involved in drug dealing together?
I don't know. I've just heard um, stories. I can't say for sure.
Okay. All right. And I'll be talking about these things in a little bit more detail because um, there was a show from a couple years ago called Cruising with Jamie, and he had on the program Shannon Bomer Kramer, who has been involved in this case. You know her. You know Shannon. In
Yes.
fact, you suggested that I talk to her, and I'll be talking about my conversation with Shannon after this interview is over. And I'm going to get into some of these things in a little bit more depth because of what Shannon's experience was from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by this time, I'm sure many of the listeners will have gone and listened to that interview as well. But so we have this cop calling a drug dealer 36 hours after the drug dealer's girlfriend goes missing. And the police officer says he's calling it because he ran into one of Mary's friends. Mary's friend says, Sue says, I never saw Tim. Very, very unusual situation there.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Chris. You said that he took a polygraph test. You don't know the results of it.
Yeah, the law enforcement said they couldn't share it because it's an ongoing investigation, so nobody knows
Right.
except them.
Okay. Do you know if Adam was ever given a polygraph test? Maybe
I
not
don't.
at the time, but since then.
That I do not know.
Okay. And have you ever heard if his story syncs up with what Chris is told that night?
I'm pretty sure. Yes, I know that they alibied each other. I guess if I can
Mm.
say that. Sorry,
Okay. Okay.
but yeah,
That's fine.
that's what I do know.
Okay. You had mentioned that Mary left with this bomber jacket, this, like what you called it, little puffy leather jacket. Was
Yes.
that jacket eventually found?
Yes, actually, I want to say about 3 months after that, during like May, June, summer, uh, at the local flea market. There was a family member of ours that happened to be there on the weekend, and they spotted Mr. Pratt, and he had a little booth, and there he was selling all of Mary's personal belongings, picture frames with the picture still in it, clothes, odds and ends, and also what he was selling was the same brown jacket that he said that she left in. And I know that her daughter went up to the flea market and it was retrieved and then turned into law enforcement. But it was the same jacket that he said she was wearing.
What did Chris have to say about that? Do you know?
What I do know is that when he was confronted about selling her stuff, he made a little sign that said free, put it in front of everything, and then took off. That's what I know for sure.
And did anybody ever ask him to resolve this discrepancy between him saying that she took the leather jacket with her and that jacket ending up at this flea market?
I don't know as far as him being questioned, but I know that when it was found out that he was at that flea market, I know that her father called the Marshall Police Department and told them, "Aren't you know to go down there and find out what's going on, or are you going to go down there and question him or whatever?" And her father was told, "Why don't you just go down there and retrieve the things?" And he told them, "No, that's not my job. That's your guys' job." And that's what I was told by her dad. So
Huh.
as far as him being questioned, I don't know, but they didn't seem too interested in it. If they're going to tell her father, "Oh, you just go down there and get the stuff for us," or whatever it was, like they didn't seem interested.
Okay. Is there any chance that maybe Mary had more than one of those kind of jackets?
No, it was specific because it was her favorite. Everybody knew that she wore it all the time. It was her favorite brown bomber jacket. So no, she did not have more than one
Okay.
bomber jacket.
What about her purse? Was her purse, that mesh purse that we've already talked about, was it also part of the stuff that he was trying to sell?
That I don't know for sure, but I know that later on, items that were in the purse you know, came back around as
Okay.
far as that goes.
And I think you specifically mean this birth certificate of Mary's. Why don't you tell the listeners the birth certificate story?
Okay, well, Mary had all her like ID card, and for whatever reason, she had a like a copy, black and white, I believe, folded up with her ID and all other cards. She always had it with her, all her cards and her ID, and it was always all of those things were in her like a rubber band. And I believe it was on Mother's Day, not that year, but the following year after she went missing, that on Mother's Day, Chris decided to go up to my aunt's job, Mary's mom, and give it to her as a gift. That was his gift for her. He said he had found it his in a box he had, but everybody knew that she carried that in her purse, like that was known. So I feel like it was kind of like I don't know, like a slap in the face or like I don't know the word for it, but like
Hmm.
just cruel, if you ask me.
So you believe that that birth certificate that he gave to Mary's mother was usually kept in the mesh purse that Mary allegedly took with her when she walked off.
Oh, I know that she
Yeah.
always had that in her.
Okay.
Like that, everybody, yeah, I know
Okay.
that for sure.
Any idea why she used to carry her birth certificate around with her? Any idea?
I don't know. She just was another, important document that that is needed at certain times. But that was just something that she did. She carried her birth certificate with her, a copy of it.
That's so odd because back in late January, I did a case of Tim Beauchart. He was another guy. He was another missing person who was carrying his birth certificate around with him, and it was found later.
Yeah, and it's a
So,
form of identification. It is.
yeah, okay. You could cover 100 cases and birth certificates never come up, and then you cover two within 6 weeks of each other, where birth certificate is a interesting part of the case. So it's very unusual. Okay. So he gave the birth certificate to her mother. That's very, very odd, especially on Valentine's Day. Okay.
No, Mother's Day. It was Mother's
Mother's
Day.
Mother's Day. I'm sorry. Mother's Day. Okay. And I need to ask you this after the fact, being that everybody until that point thought Chris was a great boyfriend. Did someone discover afterwards that possibly Mary did have charges against him?
That I don't know. I don't believe so. I can't say for sure, but I highly doubt it.
Okay.
I highly
Because
doubt it.
there does seem to be a rumor out there that that might have been the case in those charges.
Mm.
You have you ever heard anything like that?
No, I haven't. This is the first that I've heard of it. I'll definitely
Okay.
look into it, but I this is
Okay.
the first I've heard. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of rumors out there,
Yes, there
as with
is a
every
lot.
case.
Trust me, a
As
lot.
with every case, but and I'm sure you would not be surprised if I told you that I have covered some cases where women went missing not long before they were going to be going to court, because of abuse charges or something like that, so they couldn't testify. So,
It's very common, I believe. It's always when they
yeah,
decide to leave that the women end up missing. You know.
yep, yep, or yeah, that's right. Okay, so we've covered Chris, and what has he done with his life since 2004?
Let's see. After Mary went missing, let's see. Not too long after that, he got with a lady named Noreen Parker, and he ended up terrorizing her, and he ended up going to prison 2007, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He was sentenced to 15 years, but he only did 4.5. But that was a real, you know, there was a trial and everything for that, and a
Okay.
lot of stuff. Yeah, he's thank God she was able to get out of that, and but a lot of stuff was learned actually after he went to prison, and that was actually when everybody was hoping that that were so scared of him would come forward with information, and believe it or not, nobody did. It's crazy, small
Nobody.
town as it is. Yeah.
And even more recently, he's gotten into more trouble.
Oh yeah. Just in November this past year, he was arrested for a sexual assault on a 16-year-old girl, um, and he's currently in there. I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, if he's found guilty of that, he's going to be going away for a long time. He sounds like he got off a little easy with his sentencing for Noreen's case, but
Yeah,
I can't see that happening with a 16-year-old. At least let's hope not.
I
Um,
know, right?
I have to ask you, uh, being that these things have happened since she disappeared, um, are you a little surprised that Mary was with Chris, and especially for that long, 3 years?
Yes, yes, because from she was never with anybody like that before,
Mm.
and yeah, I think a lot because just on the fact that she was very outgoing, and she said how she felt and stuff, and just the whole controlling. Just yeah, she never dealt with that type of person. I don't Not many people have, as far as the kind of person he is, but I think maybe she would have been even more naive to the type of I don't even know the word for it. Yeah, but she had never before dealt with a person as him.
Mm.
So I
Do
just
you
thought it.
even know how the two of them met? Do you know?
So she used to part-time work at, I can't say what bar it was for sure, but
Mhm.
I think she was bartending, and they met at where she was working, and that's how they met. And I guess it kind of
Okay.
went from there.
Okay, so he was a customer and she was the bartender, or are they bartending together?
No, no, he was a customer.
Customer, okay. And maybe should just fill in the blank on this. We know that Chris was a drug dealer, but did he have any official job at the time, on the record job, legal job, at the time that Mary disappeared, to your
Yeah,
knowledge?
actually, he worked at a Target distribution center, so he worked in
Okay.
warehouse, work.
Okay. Now, we've talked about Tim Bryant, known. I don't know if we ever want to go to the point of saying crooked cop, but maybe dabbling in some things that he shouldn't have been as a police officer. A lot of from what I've been told, that had some demerits for not shaving and just things that just seem weird to me for a police officer. And then him calling Chris 36 hours after she disappeared, may be a little strange, but the
Yeah.
police department in Marshall has not been the greatest, has it?
No, not at all.
Okay. Is it true that they lost a bunch of evidence in Mary's case?
Yes, and I'm not sure exactly what was lost, and uh, but yes, I'm told that they lost a whole year's worth of evidence, which I don't even know how that's possible, but and I hope it's not true, but yes, that's very much what's being said is yes, that there's
Okay.
evidence lost.
Okay. And I just have to ask you once again, you being involved in this for over 5 years, do you think that that was just an accident? Or do you believe that something more nefarious took place because of one of their officers having this contact with Chris so shortly after Mary disappeared? What do you think?
What do I honestly think? I think
I'm always asking for honesty. Yes, yes. I'm always looking
that
for
it was
honesty.
covered up for whatever reason, for why they would have his back, or for whatever reason that it was covered up. I mean, it's too like it's so small. Like there's not many cases that you have missing people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but then I don't know because but still, like there's no such thing as coincidences. I believe in, and I just hope there's I don't know, but yes, I believe it was a cover up, and from what a lot of people in that town believe, it was a cover up, and I've gotten a lot of comments, and it's like they seem so matter of fact that I'm just like, wow. Like, yes, I believe it was a cover up. I do.
Okay. Because it sure doesn't look good for them. That if it was just, in my opinion, just the police officer calling Chris, who knows what's going on there? Maybe it doesn't even have anything to do with Mary's disappearance. Maybe Tim called him doing whatever
Yeah.
and didn't even know that Mary had disappeared at that point. Very possible. But then you add in on top of that, this investigation was done and evidence goes missing. Then
Yes, absolutely.
it just seems
I
just
mean,
very questionable.
I've gotten like messages from people that are like so matter of fact, like he helped cover it up, like this whoever he is,
Mhm.
Mr. Bryant, like so like from numerous people, like he knows, like he helped cover it up. He's this and that. Like they are just so matter of fact that I'm like I don't know, I'm not down there, but I mean I would. A lot of
Mm,
people feel like are so adamant about that, but
You've gotten
what do you do? What do you do? Who do you tell? I don't know.
but you've gotten a lot, being that people now know that you're the family member who's in charge of this. What you're saying is a lot of people have messaged you to tell you that.
Yes, since day one, since the beginning of the page, starting, when it first started, I paid for ads to specifically have her page like be shown, like to be seen by people in that. that area and all
Mm-hmm.
surrounding areas.
Sure.
And I paid for that ads, so I mean that's how I got the coverage that I did so fast, because I made sure that everybody in the like anybody from the Marshall and all surrounding areas, they were targeted as far as the ads go. So I mean, I got a lot of information, but I don't like who polices the police. I don't know. I've been told like but what do you do? Like, will they ever be held accountable if they're like I'm not too sure, and I'm still learning, and I'm gonna get there. But like, there's someone's got to be accountable for the way like just everything happened, or the job that was done. Like, this someone's got to answer to something. I believe.
Right. Okay. What's this been like for you? You've taken this on over 5 years ago, started the Facebook page that we'll talk about in a second. But for you, emotionally, and how much effort, time and effort have you put into this in the last 5+ years?
Honestly, it hasn't been until this last year, 2018, that, years back, I started it, and I was, really did a lot. And then, my kids, life happens, and I kind of slacked for a couple years on the page. And it's just been this past, 2018 and the end of 2017 that I got really serious, especially after talking to my cousin and, telling me how my Aunt Nita and Uncle Clifford are, they're tell spelling. And it's like, I'm like, come on, man, it's been too long. I've just been really serious about making sure that I can make something happen, because it's ridiculous. It's been too long.
Mhm.
So I'm getting there. I'm trying to, I'm not going to stop until, until something happens, or someone hears and does something about it. So I've
Okay.
been really dedicated this past year, more than ever, because, it's been too long, way too long.
Okay. Tell the listeners about this Facebook page. What is it called?
Justice for Mary Denise Lands, and
Okay.
it's on Facebook.
Okay. And by the time that listeners are hearing our voices, I will have posted that link in the discussion group and on the Unfound page. Anywhere else that you think that listeners should go to find out more about Mary and her disappearance?
The blog that the investigator did, like I got like tons of information. I think it's called justiceformary.blogspot. I don't know for sure, but
Mm-hmm.
like that's the blog that, like, like going all the way back to, I think, 2006, like from the happenings, like everything that was going down at the time, and all the little things that, just stuff that'll blow your mind. It's like crazy. But yeah, a lot of stuff on
Okay.
that site. It hasn't been like tended to in a long time, but it's still all the stuff that was going on, in the early years since she was missing.
Okay. And then, of course, I've already mentioned this show, Cruising with Jamie. I know it doesn't sound like it would cover a disappearance, but it did. And Shannon Bomer Kramer was on there, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about um, that show after this interview is over, which that show also had a lot of good information when it was done in 2017, because Shannon was on the case, very early on.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
right, and of course, Shannon, and I think you've gotten to talk to Sue as well,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I
Hmm.
know that Shannon has talked to Sue as well. Okay. Any last words before we complete this interview, Angela?
Nothing. I just want to say thank you to you for helping Mary's case get out there, and helping me with not letting her name be forgotten. The family greatly appreciates that, and I do too as well.
Well, you're welcome, Angela, and I anticipate that we'll be talking quite a bit. Whether Mary's case gets solved tomorrow or next week, whatever the case, Unfound, myself and its listeners, and of course the people that helped me put this program together, will always be here. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
And that was my interview with Angela Seide.
cousin of Mary Lands. That was Angela's first interview ever concerning Mary's case, and I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. As I mentioned during the interview, I got to speak with Shannon Bomer Kramer, who got involved very early on in the investigation of Mary's disappearance. In fact, in the Unfound Podcast discussion group on Facebook, I linked to an interview she did on the podcast Cruisin' with Jamie, where Shannon discussed her recollections from back in 2004 and onward. The link to that show will be listed in the description for this episode on Podomatic and elsewhere. I believe it's very important that people listen to Shannon's own words. However, here are some of the main points from the discussion I personally had with her not long ago. One of the first times Shannon met Chris, if not the first time, he made a pass at her and grabbed her butt. During the searches, Chris was there. He was very paranoid and at one point threw his cell phone out of his car because he thought people were listening in. Shannon had a lot to say about Tim Bryant, the cop who made the call to Chris. She went into great detail about Tim's questionable ethics and morals, and she does so in the show I mentioned. Shannon believes the main connection between Tim Bryant and Chris Pratt is actually Tim's son, who is a local drug dealer and could have been working with Chris. At one point and early on, Chris seemingly had started the rumor that Shannon had his child. Yes, really. And it became such a well-known rumor that Chris's next girlfriend, Noreen, actually testified in court that the rumor was true. Shannon insists she never had any connection like that with Chris. She finds him evil and despicable, and I believe her. Shannon has some wild stories about a PI who was involved in the case. I won't steal her thunder. You can hear it for yourself on that other show. Shannon personally believes that Sue Burkwalt did not see Tim Bryant the night he called Chris. She believes that Sue was home just like Sue says she was. Yet both Shannon and I are both very confused as to why Tim would use Sue as some kind of reason to call Chris. However, I should also note that nobody has come forward to say they saw Tim Bryant at the Stagecoach Bar the night the call was made. So the whole thing is very strange. On that topic, I was also able to find out, but not from Shannon, that Tim Bryant's story about Sue allegedly later changed. He switched the person who caused the phone call from Sue to a fellow officer, Rebecca Ivy. I told this to Shannon. She had never heard of this story. We are not sure if Rebecca even knew Mary Lands. Shannon also told me that the only police officer worth anything to ever work on Mary's case was Brett Pearson, who eventually became chief of police of Marshall. Yet he died without ever moving the case forward. The strange part? Brett Pearson and Sue Burkwalt were once boyfriend and girlfriend in high school. Coincidence? I'm thinking so. But who knows? Marshall, Michigan is small. Is it that small? Regarding the losing of evidence by the Marshall Police Department, the chief at the time in 2004, not Brett Pearson, who became chief years later, eventually took the blame, but he never did offer any clear reason how the evidence got lost. But since 2004, people have not been able to get past the idea that Tim Bryant had something to do with it. Yes, lots of peculiar things outside the obvious point that Chris Pratt seems like a good suspect for this disappearance. On that point, I stick to the theme I established at the beginning of this episode. I don't believe it's a coincidence that Mary disappeared shortly after her parents went to California. She was then at her most vulnerable with no family around. She was very isolated, and Chris might have felt he could now take things farther than he ever had before in abusing her, because Mary had nowhere else to go. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.